The gunshot echoed through Holbrook, Arizona territory like a crack of thunder. But it wasn't the bullet that made Violet Hayes's heart race. It was the pair of steel-blue eyes staring her down from across the dusty street. The year was 1883, and Trouble had just rolled into town wearing a worn leather duster and carrying more secrets than most folks accumulated in a lifetime. "Drop the gun, madam," the stranger drawled, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the Colt .45 aimed steadily at her. "I reckon there's been enough bloodshed today." Violet stood her ground, the smoking pistol still clutched in her trembling hand. The man she'd just shot writhed in the dirt, clutching his shoulder and cursing. "He tried to rob me," she stated flatly, "and I don't take orders from drifters." The blue-eyed stranger, tall and lean with the weather-beaten look of someone who'd spent most of his life under the unforgiving western sun, holstered his weapon with practiced ease. "Name's Rylan Keller, not a drifter, new sheriff." He nodded toward the badge pinned to his vest, previously hidden beneath his duster. "And you just shot the mayor's nephew." The whispers began before the wounded man was even carried away to the doctor's office. They followed Violet as she strode purposefully back to the small house she'd purchased on the edge of town just 2 weeks prior. By nightfall, all of Holbrook would be talking about the woman with the fiery temper and deadly aim, the woman with no husband but plenty of opinions. The troublemaker from back east. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Violet Hayes had come to Holbrook running from shadows darker than anyone could imagine. And the new sheriff's arrival threatened to expose everything she'd fought so desperately to hide. Rylan Keller watched the woman disappear around the corner, her spine straight as a ramrod, chin held high despite the venomous stares from the gathering crowd. Interesting. Most women would have collapsed into tears after discharging a firearm, let alone shooting a man, justified or not. But this one looked like she'd done it before. "You best be careful of that one, Sheriff," said Albert Wilkins, the elderly shopkeeper who'd witnessed the entire incident. "Folks are saying there's something not right about her. Showed up out of nowhere 2 weeks back, bought the old Miller place with cash money, keeps to herself. Mighty peculiar for a lady alone." "Peculiar ain't a crime, Mr. Wilkins," Rylan replied, tipping his hat. "But shooting a man in broad daylight is something I'll need to look into." As Rylan made his way toward the doctor's office to check on the wounded man, he couldn't shake the image of those defiant green eyes or the strange sense that he'd just crossed paths with someone who would change his life forever. The doctor's examination room smelled of carbolic acid and blood. Timothy Lawrence, the mayor's nephew, lay on the table, shirt cut away as the doctor probed the wound. "Clean through the shoulder," Dr. Harrison mumbled. "Missed the bone, lucky shot." "Wasn't luck," Timothy spat. "That crazy witch aimed for me deliberate. Came out of nowhere, accused me of following her. I was just being neighborly, offering to help with her packages. Next thing I know, she's pulling a gun." Rylan leaned against the doorframe. "That's not what Mr. Wilkins saw. Says you grabbed at her reticule. Wilkins is half blind." "I barely touched it, just trying to keep her from falling when she stumbled." "That's not the story I heard," Rylan said evenly, "and there were 3 other witnesses who seemed to agree with Mr. Wilkins." Timothy's face reddened. "My uncle will hear about this." "That woman is dangerous and doesn't belong here." "Your uncle doesn't run my office, son. The territorial governor appointed me to keep the peace in Holbrook, and that's what I aim to do, fair and square." After leaving the doctor's, Rylan headed toward the small house at the edge of town. It was a modest place, freshly whitewashed with bright yellow curtains in the windows, an attempt at cheerfulness that seemed at odds with its owner's fierce demeanor. He knocked firmly on the door and waited. No answer. He knocked again. "Miss Hayes," he called. "Sheriff Keller. We need to talk about what happened today." The door opened just enough for him to see one green eye and the barrel of a shotgun. "I've given my statement to the previous sheriff," she said coldly. "Self-defense. Case closed. Previous sheriff retired 3 days ago." "I'm the law now, and I need your version of events." She hesitated, then opened the door wider but didn't lower the shotgun. "You can come in, but keep your hands where I can see them." Rylan stepped inside, noting the sparse but tidy furnishings. A small table with 2 chairs, bookshelves crammed with volumes, and oddly several detailed maps pinned to one wall. Not the typical decor for a single woman's home. "You always this hospitable to lawmen, Miss Hayes," a flicker of something fear crossed her face before she schooled her expression. "Only the ones I don't know. Please sit." Rylan remained standing. "I prefer to stand for now. Mind telling me why you're so jumpy and why you're carrying a gun that most men would find difficult to handle? This is the West, Sheriff. A woman alone needs protection. From what? Holbrook isn't exactly Tombstone." Violet finally lowered the shotgun, placing it carefully on the table. "I don't owe you explanations about my personal choices. As for today, that man Timothy followed me from the mercantile. He tried to grab my purse when I refused his advances. I defended myself. With a bullet, he had a knife." She crossed to a small desk and retrieved a folded handkerchief. Unwrapping it revealed a small but sharp blade. "He dropped this when he fell." Rylan examined the knife without touching it. Mayor's nephew carrying a blade and accosting women. Interesting. He looked up at her. "Why didn't you mention this to anyone else? Would they have believed me? I've been in Holbrook 2 weeks, Sheriff. I've already heard the whispers. The speculation. I'm different, therefore dangerous. And are you dangerous?" Her expression softened momentarily. "Not to those who leave me in peace." There was more to her story, much more, but Rylan recognized the wall when he saw it. Pushing now would only reinforce it. "I'll need to keep this as evidence," he said, carefully wrapping the knife again. "If your account is true, and I have reason to believe it is, you won't face charges. But Miss Hayes..." He paused at the door. "Holbrook's a small town, people talk. It might be easier if you'd socialize a bit. Attend church, have tea with the ladies." She laughed, a surprisingly melodic sound. "Is that official advice from the sheriff?" "No, madam, just a man who knows how these towns work." "I didn't come to Holbrook for friendship, Sheriff Keller." "Why did you come here?" The wall came down again, her expression closing like a steel trap. "Good day, Sheriff." As the door closed behind him, Rylan stood for a moment on the porch, puzzling over the enigma that was Violet Hayes. Proper speech, educated manner, skilled with firearms and those maps. She was running from something, or perhaps toward something. Either way, trouble followed her like a shadow. What he couldn't explain was the inexplicable pull he felt toward her. In his 15 years wearing badges across the territory, Rylan had learned to trust his instincts about people. Good or bad, dangerous or harmless, he could usually tell within minutes. But Violet Hayes defied categorization, and that made her the most intriguing woman he'd encountered in years. The next morning dawned hot and cloudless, the Arizona sun already scorching by 8 o'clock. Rylan had been up since 5, reviewing the town's criminal records and making notes. Holbrook wasn't a lawless place by frontier standards, but the railroad's recent arrival had brought the usual increase in drifters, gamblers, and troublemakers. A knock at the office door interrupted his reading. "Come in," he called, expecting one of his deputies. Instead, Mayor Lawrence himself strode in, his round face flushed with anger. "Sheriff, we need to discuss this incident with my nephew immediately." Rylan leaned back in his chair. "Good morning to you too, Mayor. Coffee." "This isn't a social call. Timothy is saying that woman aimed to kill him, over nothing more than a gentlemanly gesture. Your nephew was carrying this." Rylan placed the knife on the desk. 3 witnesses saw him grab at Miss Hayes's purse. One says he explicitly threatened her when she refused his company. The mayor's face reddened further. "Preposterous. Timothy is a respected businessman. That woman is what exactly?" There's something not right about her, arriving with no connections, no references. Unmarried, living alone, and now attacking upstanding citizens. I want her arrested. Rylan stood slowly, his full height a good 6 inches above the mayor's. "Based on the evidence and witness statements, Miss Hayes acted in self-defense. I won't be filing charges against her." "This is outrageous. The town council will hear about this. They're welcome to contact the territorial governor if they have concerns about how I'm doing my job. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have rounds to make." The mayor stormed out, nearly colliding with a woman entering the office. To Ryland's surprise, it was Violet Hayes herself, dressed in a simple blue calico dress, her dark chestnut hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. "Miss Hayes," Ryland greeted her, trying not to stare. Without the fear and anger of yesterday, she was strikingly beautiful, high cheekbones, full lips, and those remarkable green eyes that seemed to shift between emerald and jade depending on the light. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, glancing back at the departing mayor. "I see you've had a pleasant morning already. Just the usual. What brings you here today?" She straightened, all business now. "I wanted to thank you for handling yesterday's unpleasantness fairly. Not everyone would have. Just doing my job, madam, nevertheless." She placed a small basket on his desk. Fresh bread as a token of appreciation. The gesture surprised him. "Thank you, that's mighty kind." An awkward silence stretched between them before she spoke again. "I also came to tell you that I'll be taking your advice about socializing. The Reverend's wife invited me to the Ladies' Aid Society meeting this afternoon." "That's good to hear. Mrs. Peterson is a fine woman, fair-minded." Violet nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Finally, she sighed. "Sheriff, there's something you should know about me." Ryland's interest piqued. "I'm listening. The reason I'm cautious around men, around everyone, really." She took a deep breath. "I was married once in Boston. My husband was not a good man. When he died last year, I discovered he'd left behind considerable debts to dangerous people. People who believe I should honor those debts. Is that why you came west? You're running," she lifted her chin. "I prefer to call it starting over, but yes, I thought Holbrook was far enough, small enough that news wouldn't travel, but after yesterday, I'm concerned my actions may have drawn unwanted attention." Ryland considered this. It explained some things: her wariness, the weapon, the cash purchase of her home, but something told him there was still more to the story. "These people your husband owed, would they come looking for you?" "They already have. In Santa Fe, then Flagstaff. I left just ahead of them each time, and now Holbrook." "Yes." Ryland walked to the window, pondering. "Do you have proof of any of this? Something I could use officially if these men show up?" She shook her head. "Just my word, Sheriff. Which I realize isn't worth much here yet." He turned to face her. "Your word is good enough for now, Miss Hayes. I appreciate you telling me. So you'll help me if they come. It's my job to protect all the citizens of Holbrook, even the ones who shoot the mayor's nephew." A small smile tugged at his lips. For the first time, Violet smiled fully in return, transforming her face. "Thank you, Sheriff Keller." "Rylan," he said impulsively. "My name's Rylan." "Rylan," she repeated softly. "I should go, the meeting. Of course. Good day, Miss Hayes." "Violet," she corrected. "If we're to be allies, you might as well use my name." As she turned to leave, Ryland called after her. "Violet, one more question. Do these dangerous men have names?" Her hand froze on the doorknob. "Blackwater Gang, led by a man called Silas Reeves. If you see anyone asking about a woman from Boston or hear those names." She didn't finish the sentence. "I'll send word immediately," he promised. After she left, Ryland opened his desk drawer and pulled out a telegram he'd received that morning from the marshal in Flagstaff. It requested information about any new arrivals from the east, specifically a woman traveling alone. The sender was identified only as Pinkerton Agent J. Morgan. Ryland had planned to ignore it. Such inquiries were common and often involved wealthy families tracking down runaway daughters or wives. But now, he folded the telegram and tucked it into his pocket. Until he knew more, this would stay between him and Violet Hayes. The Ladies' Aid Society met in the church basement, a cool refuge from the midday heat. 12 women of various ages sat in a circle, sewing quilts destined for the orphanage in Prescott. Conversation flowed around topics typical for such gatherings: children's achievements, household remedies, and of course, the latest town gossip. Violet sat quietly, focusing on her stitches, acutely aware of the sideways glances and whispered comments. Mrs. Peterson, the Reverend's wife, had been welcoming enough, but most of the others kept their distance. "Miss Hayes," said Mrs. Whitman, wife of the bank manager, "we've heard you came to us from Boston, such a civilized city. Whatever made you choose our little Holbrook?" The question seemed innocent, but Violet recognized the probing nature behind it. I desired a change of scenery after my husband's passing, she replied evenly. The doctor suggested dry air for my constitution. How terrible to lose your husband so young, sympathized Mrs. Peterson. Was it sudden? Yes, quite unexpected. Violet kept her eyes on her needlework. And no children? Asked another woman. No, we weren't so blessed. Mrs. Whitman leaned forward. We heard about that unfortunate incident yesterday with young Timothy Lawrence. Such a misunderstanding, I'm sure. Violet's needle paused. Not a misunderstanding at all, Mrs. Whitman. Mr. Lawrence attempted to rob me at knife point. I defended myself. A shocked silence fell over the room. Surely not, Mrs. Whitman exclaimed. Timothy comes from one of our finest families. Fine breeding doesn't prevent poor choices, Violet replied calmly. Fortunately, Sheriff Keller investigated thoroughly and found my actions justified. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. Perhaps we should return to our quilting, ladies. The orphans won't be warmed by our gossip. Grateful for the intervention, Violet returned to her stitches. The rest of the meeting passed in strained conversation, but she persisted, remembering Rylan's advice. When they adjourned 2 hours later, Mrs. Peterson pulled her aside. Don't mind them, dear. Small towns take time to welcome newcomers, especially, well, women in your situation. My situation? The older woman patted her hand. Independent women make folks uncomfortable out here. Give them time. She hesitated. Though I must say, your shooting skills have certainly raised some eyebrows. Where did a Boston lady learn to handle a firearm so expertly? Violet offered a careful smile. My father believed daughters should be able to protect themselves, particularly useful advice, as it turns out. Indeed. Well, you're welcome here anytime, and please join us for services on Sunday. Violet promised she would, then stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. As she walked toward home, she noticed a figure leaning against the hitching post outside the general store. Rylan Keller tipped his hat as she approached. Afternoon, Miss Hayes. How was the meeting? Educational, she replied dryly. I've learned that I'm a mysterious outsider with questionable morals who shoots respectable young men for sport. Rylan chuckled. Give it time. They'll find something more interesting to talk about eventually. I hope so. She glanced around nervously, a habit formed over months of being hunted. Any news today? He understood her meaning immediately. Nothing concerning, but I'd like to speak with you more about your situation, perhaps somewhere private. Violet considered this. Being alone with the sheriff would certainly fuel the gossip mill, but her safety concerns outweighed social propriety. My home, after sundown. I'll leave the back door unlocked. He nodded once. 8 o'clock. As she continued homeward, Violet contemplated the strange turn her life had taken. After months of solitary vigilance, always moving, always looking over her shoulder, she'd actually confided in someone, and not just anyone, the town sheriff. Her instincts screamed caution, but something about Rylan Keller's steady gaze and straightforward manner had compelled her trust. The question was whether that trust would prove to be her salvation or her ultimate downfall. Rylan arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, taking care to approach Violet's house from the rear alleyway to avoid curious eyes. The kitchen door opened before he could knock, and she ushered him inside quickly. The house was dimly lit by 2 oil lamps, casting long shadows across the simple furnishings. A pot of coffee simmered on the stove, filling the room with its rich aroma. Thank you for coming, Violet said, gesturing toward the table where 2 cups waited. Please sit. Rylan removed his hat and took a seat, noting that she seemed more at ease in her own space. Her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder, and she'd changed into a simpler dress, still proper, but less formal than her earlier attire. I received a telegram today, he began without preamble, pulling the folded paper from his pocket. From a Pinkerton detective asking about new arrivals from the east. Violet's face drained of color. She reached for the telegram with trembling fingers. May I? He handed it over, watching as her eyes scanned the brief message. Agent J. Morgan, she whispered. Josiah Morgan. He's Silas Reeves's right-hand man, not a real Pinkerton. She looked up, fear evident in her eyes. They've traced me to Holbrook already. I need to leave. Hold on, Rylan said firmly. Running again isn't the answer. Tell me the whole truth, Violet, all of it. I can't help you if I don't know what we're facing. She paced the small kitchen, agitation evident in every movement. My husband, Edward Hayes, wasn't just in debt. He was Silas Reeves's business partner in Boston. They ran gambling operations, protection rackets. Worse things I didn't learn about until after Edward's death. And how did he die exactly? Violet stopped pacing, her back to Rylan. He was shot during a dispute with a client, at least that's what Silas told me. I had my doubts. Edward had been talking about leaving the business, taking our savings and heading west. You think Reeves killed him? I'm almost certain of it. She turned to face him. After the funeral, Silas came to me, all sympathy and concern. Said Edward had been skimming money, that his death had left a significant financial obligation that now fell to me. He offered 2 choices, work for him to pay off the debt or sell him my home and everything in it. What kind of work? Her eyes met his, unflinching. The kind no respectable woman would consider. Rylan's jaw tightened. I understand. I pretended to consider his offer. That night, I packed what I could carry, took the money Edward had hidden in his study, money I suspect was indeed stolen from Silas, and fled. I've been running ever since. How much money are we talking about? $10,000. Rylan whistled low. That's a powerful motivation for a man like Reeves to keep searching. It's not just the money anymore, it's pride. No one crosses Silas Reeves and lives to tell about it. She sank into a chair. I thought I'd covered my tracks, changed my name in each town, paid cash for everything. These men, how dangerous are they? They've killed at least 3 people I know of. One was a sheriff in a small town outside Denver who tried to intervene when they found me there. Rylan absorbed this information silently, weighing options. The telegram asks for information only. They don't know for certain you're here. I could reply that no one matching your description has passed through. Hope flickered in her eyes. You would do that? I would. But it won't fool them for long. Eventually they'll send someone to verify. Then I should leave after all. No, Rylan leaned forward. That's exactly what they expect. You run, they follow. It never ends. He paused, considering. What if we set a trap instead? A trap, how? I reply to the telegram, confirming a woman matching your description was here but continued on to Tucson 3 days ago. Meanwhile, we prepare for their arrival, on our terms. Violet stared at him. You'd risk your life for a woman you barely know. Why? Rylan considered the question carefully. Why indeed? He'd built his career on caution and good judgment. Getting involved in this woman's troubles that included dangerous criminals and potentially corrupt law enforcement could end everything he'd worked for. Or worse. Yet looking at her now, the lamplight catching the auburn highlights in her hair, her green eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, he knew the answer. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because I believe you. Something shifted in her expression, gratitude, certainly, but something more. What would this trap involve? I need to think on it. But first, I need to know everything about these men, numbers, appearances, habits, weapons, everything you can remember. For the next hour, Violet detailed all she knew about Silas Reeves and his associates. Reeves himself was in his 40s, expensively dressed, with a distinct limp from an old injury. His inner circle included Josiah Morgan, a former lawman turned enforcer, brothers Liam and Connor Walsh, known for their brutality, and at least 3 others whose names she didn't know. They typically travel in pairs, she explained. Less conspicuous that way. Morgan is the tracker, he's the one who keeps finding me. Rylan took detailed notes. What about your husband's dealings? Any records, documents that might help us prove Reeves's criminal activities? Violet hesitated. There's a journal. Edward kept records of everything, dates, names, amounts. I took it when I fled. You still have it. She crossed to the bookshelf and removed a false panel behind several volumes, extracting a leather-bound book. I've never shown this to anyone. It's what Silas really wants. It contains enough evidence to destroy his entire operation. Rylan carefully examined the journal, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This is dynamite, Violet. Names of corrupt officials, judges on the payroll, details of murders disguised as accidents. He looked up at her. This is why they won't stop coming. This would hang every man in Reeves's organization. Now you understand why I can never stop running, or why you need to stop running and make a final stand. Rylan closed the journal. With this and the right allies, we could end this. Allies who would stand against men like these. I have connections, federal marshals I've worked with, an army captain stationed at Fort Apache who owes me a favor. He reached across the table and took her hand, surprising both of them with the gesture. You're not alone in this anymore, Violet. The simple touch of his hand over hers unleashed emotions she'd kept tightly controlled for months. To her horror, tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, trying to withdraw her hand. I don't usually. Don't apologize for being human. His grip tightened gently. You've carried this alone for too long. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm so tired of being afraid, of looking over my shoulder, of never belonging anywhere. You can belong here, he said softly, in Holbrook if you want to. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a breathless moment, Violet thought he might lean across the table and kiss her. Part of her hoped he would. Instead, Rylan released her hand and stood. I should go. We both need rest if we're going to plan this properly. Violet walked him to the door, acutely aware of his height, his strength, the faint scent of leather and soap that surrounded him. I'll send that telegram first thing tomorrow, he said. Then we'll meet again to discuss next steps. Keep that journal hidden and your doors locked. I will, she hesitated. Rylan, thank you not just for helping, but for believing me. He studied her face for a long moment. You know, when I first saw you yesterday, I thought you were the most complicated woman I'd ever encountered. I still think that, but now I also think you're the bravest. Before she could respond, he placed his hat on his head and slipped out into the night, leaving Violet standing in the doorway, her heart beating a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. The next morning, Rylan sent his carefully worded telegram to Agent Morgan, reporting that a woman matching Violet's description had stayed briefly in Holbrook before purchasing passage on a stagecoach to Tucson. He added that she had appeared nervous and had inquired about routes to Mexico. With that piece of misdirection in place, he turned his attention to fortifying the town against the coming threat. His first stop was the home of his deputy, Frank Wilson, a veteran of both the Civil War and a decade of frontier law enforcement. Expecting trouble. Frank asked when Rylan outlined his concerns about potential dangerous visitors without revealing Violet's specific situation. Better to be prepared than surprised, Rylan replied. I want extra patrols, especially at night. Anyone new coming to town gets noticed. And I need a meeting with Judge Parker when he arrives next week. This have anything to do with that shooting involving the Hayes woman? Rylan kept his expression neutral. Why do you ask? Frank shrugged. Just curious why you're suddenly expecting trouble right after she shows up. Town's been peaceful for months. Let's keep it that way. His next stop was the telegraph office, where he sent additional messages to contacts in the territorial capital and to the U.S. Marshal he'd mentioned to Violet a tough, incorruptible man named Samuel Dawson. As he exited the telegraph office, Rylan spotted Violet emerging from the mercantile, her arms laden with packages. Several townswomen pointedly crossed the street to avoid her path. Rylan frowned at the display but wasn't surprised. Small towns had long memories, and yesterday's shooting was still fresh gossip. What did surprise him was seeing Timothy Lawrence approach Violet, his arm in a sling, his manner seemingly conciliatory. Rylan moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. Miss Hayes, Timothy was saying, I wanted to apologize for our misunderstanding yesterday. Violet regarded him warily. It was hardly a misunderstanding, Mr. Lawrence, but I accept your apology. Perhaps I could make it up to you, escort you to the social on Saturday evening. That's very kind, but I must decline. Timothy's friendly expression hardened. Is it because of your friendship with the sheriff? People are talking, you know, seen him visiting your home after dark. Violet's chin lifted. My friendship with Sheriff Keller is none of your concern, nor is it fodder for gossip. Just a friendly warning, Miss Hayes. Holbrook values propriety. Women who disregard it often find themselves unwelcome. With a tip of his hat, Timothy walked away. Rylan stepped forward as Violet watched Timothy's retreat, her posture rigid with anger. Need a hand with those packages, he offered. She turned, surprised by his presence. How much did you hear? Enough to confirm my opinion that Timothy Lawrence is a snake. He took several packages from her arms. May I walk you home? They fell into step together, ignoring the curious stares from passers-by. I sent the telegram, Rylan said quietly. Also reached out to some contacts who might help. We should discuss the next steps tonight. Yes, but not at my home. After Timothy's comments, I'd rather not fuel more gossip. Rylan considered this. My office then, after 8 when the deputy changes shift, use the back entrance. She nodded agreement. Have you considered what we'll do when they arrive, Reeves's men? I'm working on it. The problem is timing. We don't know when they'll come, how many, or even if they'll believe my telegram. They'll send Morgan first, Violet said confidently. He's cautious. He'll observe before making any moves. Good, that gives us time to prepare. They reached her house and Rylan handed back her packages. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending an unexpected jolt through his arm. From Violet's sudden intake of breath, she'd felt it too. Tonight, then, she said softly, her cheeks flushed. Tonight, he confirmed, reluctantly stepping back. Lock your doors. As he walked away, Rylan reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought Violet Hayes into his life. 3 days ago, he'd been focused solely on building his reputation as Holbrook's new sheriff. Now he was planning to confront dangerous criminals while battling an inconvenient but undeniable attraction to the woman at the center of it all. The situation was complicated, dangerous, and entirely unprofessional. And yet, he couldn't remember feeling more alive. Violet spent the afternoon securing her home, checking window locks, positioning furniture to create obstacles near entrances, and ensuring her weapons were loaded and accessible. The activities were familiar, almost comforting in their routine. She'd done this in every town, every rented room since fleeing Boston. What wasn't routine was the flutter of anticipation she felt at the thought of seeing Rylan again. It was foolish, this growing attraction, dangerous even. Attachments were luxuries she couldn't afford, and yet. His offer of help, his belief in her story without question, had awakened something she'd thought long dead. Hope, not just for survival, but for a life beyond running. At precisely 8:15, Violet slipped through the back door of the sheriff's office, a shawl pulled over her head to obscure her face. The main office was empty as promised, lit only by a single lamp on the desk. Rylan emerged from a back room at the sound of her entrance. You made it, he said, relief evident in his voice. Any trouble? None. The streets are quiet tonight. He gestured to a chair near his desk, then poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on the small stove in the corner. I've been thinking about our situation. The key is to control when and where we confront these men. Violet accepted the coffee gratefully. Have you heard back from your contacts? Marshal Dawson will be in the territory next week. He's bringing 2 deputies. And Judge Parker arrives for circuit court on Tuesday. Rylan spread a map of Holbrook on his desk. I've been considering locations for our confrontation, somewhere we can control access, have clear lines of sight, but keep innocent townspeople away from danger. Violet studied the map. You're really planning to face them directly, not just. Hand me over to federal authorities for protection. Rylan looked up, surprised. Is that what you thought I'd do? It would be the sensible approach, the safe one. Safe for whom? The marshals would protect you, certainly, but they'd also insist on using you to lure Reeves out. You'd be bait in a trap not of your making. He shook his head. I won't put you in that position. And your plan doesn't use me as bait. My plan gives you agency. You'll know every detail, have input on every decision, and I'll be with you every step of the way. The intensity in his gaze made Violet's breath catch. Why are you doing this, Rylan? Really? He was silent for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with his answer. When I took this badge, I made a promise to protect the innocent, but it's more than duty now. He met her eyes. I care what happens to you, Violet, more than is probably wise for a man in my position. The admission hung between them, changing the air in the room. Violet's heart pounded against her ribs. That's dangerous thinking, Sheriff, she whispered. I'm finding that many things about you lead to dangerous thinking. A small smile curved his lips, but we should focus on the matter at hand. Grateful for the return to practical concerns, Violet leaned over the map. What locations are you considering? They spent the next hour discussing strategic positions, signals, and contingency plans. Rylan's tactical knowledge impressed Violet. He thought of details she would never have considered, from lines of retreat to the direction of sunlight at different times of day. You've done this before, she observed, set traps for dangerous men a few times, during the war and later as a deputy in Tucson. He rolled up the map. But every situation is different. These men are hunting you specifically, which makes their patterns more predictable. And more desperate, Violet added. Silas doesn't like losing, neither do I. Rylan's expression hardened, especially when the stakes matter. The conviction in his voice sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something deeper, more primal. I should go, she said abruptly, rising from her chair. It's getting late. Rylan stood as well. I'll walk you home. That's not necessary. I can manage. It's not up for discussion. He reached for his hat. These men could already be watching the town. I'm not taking chances with your safety. The night air was cool against Violet's flushed skin as they walked in companionable silence through Holbrook's deserted streets. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silvery light and deep shadows. It's beautiful here, she said softly. I never expected to find beauty in a place like this. The desert grows on you, Rylan agreed. Stark at first glance, but full of life and color when you look closer. Like you, Violet thought but didn't say. Instead, she asked, how did you end up in Holbrook? You don't seem like a man who'd choose a quiet posting. After Tucson, I needed someplace less. He searched for the word. Corrupting. Big towns near railroads and mining operations attract a certain element. After a while, the line between lawman and outlaw starts to blur. You were afraid of crossing that line. I saw others cross it. Good men who started making compromises, small ones at first, then bigger. He looked up at the star-filled sky. I didn't want to become that, so you came to Holbrook to stay honest. Something like that. He glanced at her. What about you? If none of this had happened with Reeves, where would you be? Violet considered the question. I always wanted to teach. Before I married Edward, I was studying to become a school teacher. That suits you. I can picture it, Miss Hayes instructing young minds with that same determination she uses to face down troublemakers. She laughed softly. Perhaps someday when this is over, if it's ever over. They reached her house, and Violet turned to face him on the porch steps. The height difference put them nearly eye to eye. Thank you for walking me home, she said. My pleasure. Neither moved. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Rylan, she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. I know, he replied, as if he truly did understand. This isn't the right time for either of us. No, it isn't. Still, when he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, she didn't pull away. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and calloused. Be safe, he whispered. Lock the door behind you. Then he was gone, striding back toward town, his tall figure gradually swallowed by shadows. Violet watched until she could no longer see him, her cheek still tingling from his touch. Then she entered her house and locked the door as instructed, leaning against it with a shaky exhale. For the first time in months, her last thought before sleep wasn't of fear or planning or escape routes. It was of steel blue eyes and the gentle touch of a hand against her cheek. 3 days passed with no sign of Reeves's men, but the waiting only heightened Rylan's vigilance. He increased patrols, briefed his deputies on watching for strangers, and personally checked on Violet each day, sometimes officially, sometimes just happening to pass by her home or cross her path in town. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Whispers followed both of them now. Some were scandalized by the apparent attachment between their new sheriff and the troublesome newcomer. Others found it romantic the lawman and the mysterious lady from the east. Rylan ignored the gossip. He had more important concerns, chief among them the safety of the increasingly distracting Violet Hayes. On the fourth morning, a telegram arrived from Marshal Dawson, confirming he would reach Holbrook within 3 days. That same afternoon, Judge Parker arrived for the circuit court session, a full day earlier than expected. Rylan met with the judge in the small room that served as Holbrook's courthouse, explaining the situation in careful detail while showing him Edward Hayes's journal. Judge Parker, a stern man with a reputation for harsh sentences but impeccable fairness, examined the journal with growing alarm. "This is extraordinary evidence, Sheriff. Names of officials I've suspected for years but could never prove were corrupt." He looked up at Rylan. "And the woman who possesses this, she's here in Holbrook?" "Yes, sir, under my protection." The judge raised a bushy eyebrow. "Protection, is it? The telegraph operator mentioned you've been seen frequently in her company, in a professional capacity only, I trust." Rylan kept his expression neutral. "Miss Hayes is a witness in a potentially significant case involving organized crime. My interactions with her are focused on ensuring her safety and building a case against Silas Reeves." The judge didn't look entirely convinced. "Well, I suggest you bring her here tomorrow so I can take her formal statement. With this journal and her testimony, we could secure federal indictments against Reeves and his entire organization." "That's our intention, Your Honor. Once Marshal Dawson arrives, we needn't wait for Dawson." "I can issue the warrants immediately based on her sworn testimony." Rylan hesitated. "With respect, sir, I'd prefer to wait for additional law enforcement support before proceeding. Reeves's men could already be in the area." The judge waved a dismissive hand. "I've traveled with 2 armed bailiffs, Sheriff. Combined with you and your deputies, we have more than enough firepower to handle a few criminals. Bring the woman tomorrow at 10. Recognizing the futility of further argument, Rylan agreed, though uneasiness settled in his stomach as he left the courthouse. That evening, he visited Violet to inform her of the judge's decision. She received the news with visible apprehension. "So soon, before your marshal friend arrives." "Judge Parker is determined, and to be fair, his plan has merit. With your statement and the journal, he can issue warrants immediately. Federal agents in Boston could move against Reeves before he even knows what's happening." Violet paced her small parlor. "It feels rushed, dangerous." "I share your concerns." Rylan watched her movement, noting the grace with which she carried herself even in agitation. "But Parker is the highest legal authority in the territory. If he wants your statement tomorrow, we comply." She stopped pacing and faced him. "What if Reeves's men are already here, watching? Following me to the courthouse would be the perfect opportunity to strike." "I've considered that. I'll have deputies stationed along the route and at the courthouse. You'll be with me the entire time." He stepped closer, compelled to offer reassurance beyond words. "I won't let anything happen to you, Violet." Her expression softened. "I believe you, She sighed. "I've lived with fear for so long, it's hard to imagine it ending, hard to trust that anything good can last." "Some things last," he said quietly, "if you let them." The air between them crackled with tension, with possibilities neither had voiced. Violet's gaze dropped to his mouth, then back to his eyes. "Rylan," she whispered, his name a question and an invitation. He closed the distance between them, one hand gently cupping her face while the other settled at her waist. Their lips met softly at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as Violet's arms wound around his neck. The kiss awakened something primal in Rylan, a hunger that had nothing to do with physical need and everything to do with connection. With finding something unexpected and precious in the most unlikely place. When they finally separated, both breathless, Violet rested her forehead against his chest. "This complicates things," she murmured. "Things were already complicated." He stroked her hair, marveling at its silken texture. "But this feels right, Violet, despite everything." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength intermingled in her expression. I never expected you, never thought I could feel this way again, especially not now with everything unsettled. Life rarely waits for the perfect moment. He brushed his thumb across her lower lip. Sometimes you have to claim happiness where you find it. Is that what this is? Happiness? It could be, if we're brave enough to try. He reluctantly stepped back. But first, we need to get through tomorrow. After your statement, after Judge Parker issues those warrants, we can talk about what comes next. Violet nodded, composing herself. 10 o'clock at the courthouse, I'll be ready. I'll come for you at 9:30. He kissed her once more, briefly but with promise. Lock the door behind me. As he walked back to his office, Rylan struggled to reconcile his professional responsibilities with his growing feelings for Violet. He'd never been one to mix duty with personal matters. In 15 years wearing a badge, he'd maintained clear boundaries between his work and his heart. But Violet Hayes had slipped through those boundaries as easily as moonlight through window blinds, illuminating places long left dark. And God help him, he didn't want to shut her out. Morning dawned bright and clear, the September air carrying the first hint of autumn coolness. Rylan rose early, checking and rechecking his preparations for Violet's safe transport to the courthouse. Deputy Wilson would take the north route through town, watching for any suspicious activity. Deputy Collins would be stationed at the courthouse itself. Rylan had even enlisted Mr. Wilkins from the general store to keep an eye on the street from his second-floor window, which offered an excellent vantage point. At 9:15, Rylan was making final rounds when Deputy Collins burst into the office, face flushed with exertion. Sheriff. Two strangers just rode in from the east. Checked into the hotel not 10 minutes ago. One's asking questions about recent arrivals from back east. Rylan's blood ran cold. Descriptions? Tall fellow, well-dressed with a trimmed beard. The other's younger, rough-looking type. Both armed, though not obviously so, Morgan and one of the Walsh brothers, Rylan guessed. They'd arrived sooner than expected, likely having doubted the telegram about Violet heading to Tucson. Keep an eye on them, Collins, discreetly. I want to know if they leave the hotel. Rylan checked his pocket watch. I need to collect Miss Hayes for her meeting with the judge. Want me to go instead? If these men are who you think they are. No, I'll go myself. Just watch the hotel and send word if they move. Rylan hurried through town, hyper-aware of every face, every movement in his periphery. The timing couldn't be worse. With Morgan already in Holbrook, bringing Violet to the courthouse might be walking into a trap, but Judge Parker was expecting them, and the judge wasn't a man who tolerated delays. More importantly, getting Violet's statement on record was crucial to building the case against Reeves. Reaching Violet's house, Rylan knocked rapidly. She opened the door immediately, dressed in a modest blue dress, her hair neatly arranged beneath a small hat. You're early, she said, then noticed his expression. What's wrong? They're here. Morgan and likely one of the Walsh brothers arrived this morning. Fear flashed across her face, quickly replaced by determination. Do we continue as planned? Yes, but with extreme caution. Stay close to me. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, we abort immediately. She nodded, retrieving her reticule and the carefully wrapped journal from its hiding place. I'm ready. They took a circuitous route to the courthouse, avoiding main streets and keeping to areas where buildings provided cover. Rylan's hand never strayed far from his holstered revolver, and he constantly scanned their surroundings for threats. They were 1 block from the courthouse when Rylan spotted him, a well-dressed man with a neatly trimmed beard, casually leaning against a hitching post as if waiting for someone. Josiah Morgan. Don't react, Rylan murmured to Violet, but Morgan is directly ahead. We need to change course. Too late. Morgan's gaze swept the street and locked onto them. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a predatory smile. He straightened, one hand moving subtly toward his coat. Run, Rylan ordered, pulling Violet into a narrow alley between buildings. Back door of the courthouse. Go, they sprinted through the alley as a shot cracked behind them, splintering wood where Rylan's head had been a moment earlier. Violet hitched up her skirts and ran with surprising speed, Rylan close behind, shielding her with his body, Emerging from the alley, they crossed a small yard and reached the rear entrance of the courthouse. Rylan hammered on the door, which opened to reveal one of Judge Parker's bailiffs. "Inside, quickly!" Rylan pushed Violet through the doorway. "Armed men in pursuit. Secure the building." The bailiff immediately barred the door while Rylan guided Violet through the corridor toward the main courtroom. They burst through the doors to find Judge Parker already seated at his bench, looking irritated at the commotion. "Sheriff Keller, what is the meaning of armed criminals, Your Honor? They've followed Miss Hayes to Holbrook and just took shots at us in the street." Rylan positioned himself at the courtroom's main entrance, peering through a crack in the door. "We need to secure this room immediately." The judge's expression shifted from annoyance to alert concern. "Bailiffs, bar all doors and take positions at the windows," he beckoned to Violet. "Come forward, Miss Hayes. Let's get your statement quickly before this situation deteriorates further." Violet approached the bench, clutching Edward's journal. Despite the danger, she maintained remarkable composure as she was sworn in and began recounting her story for the official record. Rylan divided his attention between her testimony and the windows, where he could see Deputy Collins taking cover behind a water trough across the street, his rifle trained on the hotel entrance. Where was Morgan now, and the other man, Walsh? Had they regrouped, or were they planning another approach? His question was answered by the sound of breaking glass from a side window. A small object clattered across the courtroom floor, a stick of dynamite, its fuse burning rapidly. "Take cover," Rylan shouted, diving toward the explosive. In one fluid motion, he scooped it up and hurled it back through the broken window. The explosion outside rocked the building, sending plaster dust raining from the ceiling. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Judge Parker was hustled behind his bench by a bailiff. Violet took cover beneath the heavy oak table used by attorneys. Rylan drew his revolver and moved to the shattered window, catching glimpses of movement outside. "They're trying to flush us out," he called to the bailiffs. "Hold positions, deputies will be converging on our location." As if in response, gunfire erupted in the street, Deputy Collins engaging the attackers from his position. "Your Honor," Rylan said urgently, "is there a secure route out of the building? A cellar or tunnel?" "The storage cellar," the judge replied. "It connects to the bank next door through an old access tunnel, originally built as a safe room during Apache raids." "Perfect. We need to move Miss Hayes immediately." Rylan turned to Violet. "You need to go with the bailiff. He'll take you through the tunnel to safety." "What about you?" she asked, eyes wide with concern. "I need to coordinate with my deputies, contain this situation. I'll join you as soon as I can." "No," she stood, defiant despite the danger. "I won't leave you to face them alone. This is my fight." "It's our fight now," he corrected her. "But you need to secure that journal. It's the evidence that will end Reeves for good." Before she could argue further, another explosion rocked the building, this one at the front doors. Wood splintered as the doors partially gave way. "Go," Rylan ordered. "Now." The bailiff grabbed Violet's arm, pulling her toward a door behind the judge's bench. She cast one last look at Rylan, a look full of emotions too complex to name, before disappearing through the doorway. Rylan positioned himself behind an overturned table, his revolver trained on the damaged front doors. Through the settling dust, he could make out two figures, Morgan and a younger man who must be one of the Walsh brothers. "Sheriff Keller," Morgan called, his refined Boston accent incongruous with the violence of the situation. "A word of professional courtesy. We have no quarrel with you or this town. Our business is with Violet Hayes only. Send her out with the journal and we'll depart peacefully." "That's not going to happen, Morgan," Rylan replied. "You're outnumbered and surrounded. Lay down your weapons and surrender." A cold laugh answered him. "Surrounded? Your deputies are pinned down across the street, Sheriff. It's just you and an elderly judge against the two of us." "Poor odds for you, I'd say." A bullet punctuated his statement, striking uncomfortably close to Rylan's position. "Last chance, Sheriff," Morgan called. "The woman, or we burn this building down around you." Rylan's response was a precisely aimed shot that caught the younger Walsh in the shoulder, spinning him back against the damaged doorframe. Morgan returned fire immediately, forcing Rylan to duck behind cover. The exchange continued for several tense minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Then Rylan heard what Morgan couldn't: the sound of boots on the boardwalk outside, approaching from both directions. Deputy Wilson's voice rang out. "Drop your weapons, you're surrounded." A fusillade of shots followed, then a cry of pain that Rylan recognized as Morgan's voice. Taking advantage of the distraction, Rylan moved swiftly to a new position with a clearer line of sight. Morgan was down, clutching his leg. Walsh was attempting to drag him toward cover, his own wounded shoulder making the effort nearly impossible. "It's over," Rylan called. "Drop your weapons now, or the next shots won't be so merciful." For a moment, it seemed Morgan would surrender. Then his expression hardened, and he raised his revolver for one last, desperate shot, not at Rylan or the deputies, but toward the door through which Violet had escaped. Rylan fired without hesitation. His bullet struck Morgan square in the chest, ending the threat permanently. Walsh, seeing his companion fall, immediately dropped his weapon and raised his hands. "Wise choice," Rylan said, approaching cautiously. "Deputy, secure him. Judge Parker, are you injured?" "Unharmed," the judge replied, emerging from behind his bench, visibly shaken but dignified. "Remarkable shooting, Sheriff." "Thank you, Your Honor. I need to check on Miss Hayes." Rylan handed the subdued Walsh to Deputy Wilson and headed for the back room, anxiety growing with each step. He found the cellar access open, but no sign of Violet or the bailiff. Following the narrow tunnel, Rylan emerged into the bank's back office, where the manager stood frozen in shock, staring at the open-floor safe. "Where are they?" Rylan demanded. "The woman and the bailiff." They just left," the manager stammered. "Headed out the back." The man, he had a gun to her head. Cold dread washed over Rylan. Not a bailiff, a third member of Reeves's gang, positioned to intercept Violet if Morgan's direct assault failed. A contingency plan Rylan hadn't anticipated. He sprinted through the bank and out the rear door, scanning the alley desperately. In the distance, he caught a glimpse of Violet's blue dress as she was forced onto a horse by a man in what only superficially resembled a bailiff's uniform. Drawing his revolver, Rylan took careful aim, but the pair was already too far away, the risk of hitting Violet too great. As they disappeared around a corner, Rylan raced to the livery stable, commandeered the fastest horse available, and charged after them. The pursuit led east out of town, into the rugged landscape of scrub and rock formations that characterized this part of Arizona. Rylan pushed his mount hard, gaining ground gradually on the slower horse carrying two riders. They were heading toward the mountains, likely to a predetermined rendezvous point where Reeves's remaining men would be waiting. If Violet reached that point, Rylan knew his chances of rescuing her would diminish drastically. Cresting a rise, he spotted them half a mile ahead, their horse laboring up a steep trail. Rylan urged his mount forward, closing the distance. The fake bailiff glanced back, saw his pursuit, and fired wildly in Rylan's direction. The shots went wide, but they spooked Rylan's horse, costing precious seconds as he fought to regain control. By the time he resumed the chase, the kidnappers had reached a narrow canyon entrance. Rylan approached more cautiously now, aware that the terrain offered perfect positions for ambush. Dismounting, he proceeded on foot, his revolver ready. The canyon opened into a small box canyon with steep walls and a single entrance, the perfect trap. In the center, Violet stood with her captor's arm around her neck, his gun pressed to her temple. "That's far enough, Sheriff," the man called. He had shed his bailiff disguise, revealing trail-worn clothes and a face weathered by a hard life. "Drop your weapon, or the lady dies right here." Rylan kept his revolver aimed steadily. "You're alone, Mr. Morgan and Walsh are dealt with. No one's coming to help you." "Maybe not, but I can still put a bullet in her head before you shoot me." The man tightened his grip on Violet, who winced in pain. "Drop the gun now." Rylan assessed the situation rapidly. The distance was approximately 30 yards, a difficult shot under ideal conditions, nearly impossible with Violet as a partial shield. But he noticed something: the kidnapper hadn't Violet's hand, moving slowly toward her skirt pocket. All right, Rylan called, making a show of lowering his weapon slightly. Let's talk about this. What do you want? The journal, for starters, then safe passage out of the territory. The journal's back in town, locked in the judge's safe, Rylan lied. Let Miss Hayes go and I'll take you to it. The kidnapper laughed. Do I look stupid? She has it. She wouldn't leave without it. As he spoke, Violet's hand emerged from her pocket, something small and metallic glinting in her palm. A derringer, the small backup weapon Rylan had insisted she carry. Their eyes met across the distance, a silent communication passing between them. Rylan gave an almost imperceptible nod. Last chance, he called to the kidnapper. Release her now, or Violet drove her elbow hard into her captor's stomach, simultaneously twisting away from his gun. As he doubled over, she pressed the derringer against his side and fired. The kidnapper howled in pain, his own weapon discharging harmlessly into the ground. Rylan was already running forward, covering the distance in seconds. He tackled the wounded man before he could recover, driving him to the ground and securing his wrists with handcuffs. Are you hurt? He asked Violet urgently, scanning her for injuries. No, her voice shook slightly, but her eyes were clear and determined. The journal is safe, I kept it hidden. Rylan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. I thought I'd lost you, he murmured into her hair. When I saw him taking you away, you found me, she whispered back. You kept your promise. They stood like that for a long moment, clinging to each other while the wounded kidnapper groaned on the ground beside them. Finally, Rylan reluctantly released her. We need to get back to town. Judge Parker will be waiting for your statement, and I need to secure our prisoner. What happens now? Violet asked as they walked toward the horses. With Morgan dead and this one captured, Walsh will talk to save himself. Combined with your testimony and the journal, it's enough to issue federal warrants for Reeves and his entire organization. Your running days are over, Violet. She stopped, looking up at him with an expression of cautious hope. Truly, just like that, not just like that, you were incredibly brave. You faced your fears and fought back. He took her hand, and you weren't alone. No, she agreed softly, I wasn't. Back in Holbrook, the aftermath of the courthouse attack created a sensation unlike anything the small town had seen. Judge Parker immediately took Violet's formal statement, along with the journal evidence. Federal telegrams were dispatched to Boston and Washington, setting in motion the legal machinery that would eventually dismantle Silas Reeves's criminal empire. The surviving Walsh brother, facing multiple federal charges, eagerly provided additional testimony in exchange for leniency. The wounded kidnapper, identified as Peter Dolan, another of Reeves's enforcers, was less cooperative but equally destined for a long prison sentence. 3 days after the attack, Marshal Dawson finally arrived with his deputies, just in time to escort the prisoners to the territorial prison. He also brought news that federal agents in Boston had already arrested several of Reeves's associates based on the telegraphed evidence. Reeves himself has disappeared, Dawson told Rylan and Violet as they sat in the sheriff's office. But every law enforcement agency in the country has his description now. His days of freedom are numbered. Will I need to testify in Boston? Violet asked. Eventually, yes, but not immediately and not alone. Federal marshals will ensure your safety throughout the process. Dawson smiled at her. You've done a remarkable service, Miss Hayes. Your courage has brought down one of the most sophisticated criminal operations in the East. After the marshal departed, Rylan and Violet walked slowly through town toward her home. For the first time, Violet noticed that the suspicious glances from townsfolk had been replaced by curious, almost admiring looks. You're something of a local hero now, Rylan observed, following her gaze. The mysterious Eastern lady who helped the sheriff defeat dangerous criminals. Is that what they're saying? Violet smiled. Last week I was the troublemaker who shot the mayor's nephew. People change their minds when they learn the truth. They reached her porch and Rylan turned to face her. Speaking of truth, we need to talk about what happens next. Violet's expression sobered. Yes, I suppose we do. You mentioned wanting to teach someday, he began carefully. Holbrook School needs a teacher for the spring term. The current one is returning east for family reasons. Hope and uncertainty warred in Violet's eyes. Are you suggesting I stay in Holbrook? I'm suggesting you consider it. Rylan took her hands in his. These past days have been extraordinary, Violet, dangerous, frightening, but also the most alive I've felt in years, and that's because of you, Rylan. I know it's too soon. I know you've only just gained your freedom and you might want to use it to go anywhere but here. He squeezed her hands gently. But if you stayed, if you wanted to see what might grow between us without the shadow of danger hanging over us. The town might not approve, she said softly. The sheriff and the woman who caused so much trouble. The town whispered you were trouble, Rylan agreed, stepping closer, but I knew better from the start. You're the piece I've been searching for, Violet, the missing piece that makes everything else make sense. Tears welled in her eyes. I never thought I'd find someone who would look at me that way again, who would see past the walls I built. Is that a yes? You'll stay? Instead of answering with words, Violet rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that held both promise and passion. Rylan's arms encircled her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground as he deepened the kiss. When they finally separated, breathless and smiling, Violet's answer was simple. I'm already home. 2 years passed, bringing changes to Holbrook and to the lives of Sheriff Rylan Keller and his wife, Violet Keller. The small house at the edge of town had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Their son, James Edward Keller, born just 10 months after their wedding, now toddled energetically around the fenced yard under his mother's watchful eye. Violet had indeed become the town's schoolteacher, her firm but fair approach winning the respect of both students and parents. The same townsfolk who had once whispered about her now sought her advice on educational matters and invited her to social gatherings. Rylan continued as sheriff, though with considerably less excitement than during those fateful days in 1883. Holbrook had grown with the railroad's expansion, becoming a respectable stop on the line, with new businesses and residents arriving regularly. On a warm September evening, exactly 2 years after the courthouse attack, Rylan returned home to find Violet sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset while James slept peacefully in her lap. "How are my favorite people?" Rylan asked, kissing her softly before taking a seat beside her. "Wonderful," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "James helped me plant flowers today, mostly by digging holes where I didn't need them, but his enthusiasm was commendable." Rylan chuckled, gently stroking his son's dark hair, just like his mother, determined to do things his own way. "A telegram came for you," Violet said, reaching into her pocket. "From Marshal Dawson." Rylan opened it with curious fingers, then broke into a wide smile as he read. "They've got him. Silas Reeves was captured in Montreal yesterday. He's being extradited to face federal charges." Violet exhaled a long breath, as if releasing the last bit of tension she'd carried these past 2 years. "It's really over then." "It's been over for a while," Rylan reminded her gently. "But yes, now it's official. Reeves will never threaten you again." She nodded, gazing out at the Arizona sunset painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson. "Do you remember what you said to me that day? After everything?" "I said a lot of things, most of them embarrassingly sincere." His eyes crinkled with humor. "You said I was the piece you'd been searching for." She turned to him, her green eyes soft with emotion. "It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. I meant it." He cupped her cheek with his hand. "Still do, I know," she smiled, placing her hand over his. "And you were right about something else, too." "What's that?" "Some things do last if you let them." She guided his free hand to rest on her stomach. "Like families that keep growing." Rylan's eyes widened as her meaning registered. Violet nodded, her smile radiant. "Doctor confirmed it yesterday. Early spring, he thinks." Joy surged through Rylan as he gathered his wife and sleeping son into a gentle embrace, careful not to wake James. "I love you, Violet Keller, more than I have words to express." "You don't need words," she whispered back. "You show me every day." As twilight deepened over Holbrook, the Kellers sat together on their porch, a family forged in danger but flourishing in peace. The town that had once whispered about trouble now pointed to them as an example of devotion and courage. And Violet, who had once known only fear and flight, had found her permanent home in the arms of a man who had seen her true worth from the very beginning. In the years that followed, their family grew again with the birth of twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine. Rylan eventually became mayor of Holbrook, while Violet expanded her teaching into establishing the town's first proper school building and library. The journal that had once been their most dangerous possession became part of the historical archives, a reminder of justice served and a new life claimed against all odds. And every year, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Rylan would remind Violet of his first impression that she was the most complicated woman he'd ever met, and the bravest. She would always smile and reply with the simple truth that had guided them through danger into lasting happiness. Sometimes the things worth having require courage to claim them, and sometimes the peace we're searching for comes disguised as trouble.